camera going to be?
It's
There.
right there.
It's right there.
Yep. Yep. Now, Michael, I go back to this.
There you go. Big image. There we go.
Oh, look at that. And this is supposed to begin at 9:15?
Yeah, right now. Well, and
And-
that clock's a little fast.
And what
so,
time do you wrap by?
We got about 50 minutes to about 10
Five
after, 10 after 10:15.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
1.5 is a little hard to work with it. It's a little bit constraining. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I started.
no, come on, sit
No,
down.
come
We're
on, sit
going.
down.
Jim, hi, I'm the Reverend Lori Anzalati
Oh,
for all of
yes.
you watching on Facebook and our YouTube recording. And I am pleased to welcome today our guest, the Reverend Jim Poinsett, Presbyterian minister, but his day job right now is Executive Director of the Interfaith Partnership of Greater St. Louis. So welcome to St. Francis, Jim.
I'm excited to be at St. Francis. Thank you, Reverend Lori, and welcome to all of you. I hope to, I'm prepared for one format, and so I want to make it work within the format for this everybody's lucky on Facebook or Zoom, but I want this to be a conversation, so I hope that we are able to talk with one another. And so, as Lori said, my name is Jim Poinsett. I am the Executive Director of the Interfaith Partnership of Greater St. Louis, and I am also ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA. And part of my story is how I got to interfaith work is that I am a second career clergy person, and before I went to divinity school, I was working in Washington, D.C. in politics, and was in Washington, D.C. on September 11th, 2001. And my offices were on K Street, and from the offices, you could see the smoke rising from the Pentagon, and of course, everything that happened in New York City at the World Trade Center, and all that. And that really started me on a spiritual journey of one of vocation, which led me to go to divinity school and then become a minister of word and sacrament in the Presbyterian Church USA. But then also part of that journey included a real deep desire to understand more about how violence can happen like that in God's name. And that was, and all religions are prone to this. All religions can fall into, factions of all religions can resort to violence and that kind of thing. And we're not necessarily here to talk about that now, but what that led me to come to the realization is that if we are all going to live in this world together, as the world continues to shrink, that we are all going to have to learn how to live with one another and live side by side. And as technology advances and the world is getting smaller and smaller, and we need to do more than just be able to tolerate one another. We need to have acceptance and learn to live and work together if we are going to have any chance of surviving at all. So that's kind of big art. We're not going to get into those big questions today, but we are going to talk a little bit about not only has the world shrunk, but our population in the United States has become more and more diverse, and has become more religiously diverse. So it's even it's more important that interfaith and multi-religious work and collaboration happens. But there are hopefully ways that we can do that without losing our Christian identity. Doing interfaith work does not mean that we are not committed, dedicated followers of Jesus Christ. But on the contrary, in many ways, we might be able to live out the gospel in new ways and in working and learning from people of other faiths. But first, I would just, before we get started on that, I'd like to hear a little bit about all of you and your how you arrived at this. And so we'll just do this real quick for the benefit of one another, is just if you can tell me your name, how you came to Christianity. I'm guessing as normative is that we were born into it, and what it is that you love about Christianity. And I'll go first. So Jim Poinsett, and I was born into Christianity, and so it is the religion of origin for me. And although I did shift from being a Baptist growing up to a Presbyterian as an adult, and for me it is learning and following the teachings of Jesus and his ministry on life is what I love most about Christianity. Do you want to go and model this for
Sure.
people? And then we'll
I'm Laurie Anzalotti. I was born into Catholicism.
which is Christianity.
I know,
Okay.
but it is a very, it's so there's so many cultural pieces that go with that, along with belief pieces. So that behavior, belief, belonging triad, there's a lot of belonging and behavior pieces, I think. And then moved to the Episcopal Church in my early 30s. And I'm second career clergy as well. And what I love about Christianity is its sacramental nature. As a good Catholic and Episcopalian, I love that the divine realities are infused in outward symbols, hold inner realities of God's nature and love for us.
Great. Which way do we want to go?
Michael Booker, born into Christianity. We traveled a lot growing up. This is my mom. And so we actually remember lots of different churches going through there. I have hence had a very strong resonance with ecumenical work. I'm on the PCUSA Episcopal Dialogue with nice people like Neil Preza, whose name may be something to you. So there's some phenomenal people I get to meet through that kind of work. So I have a real heart for this kind of activity. And again, speaking with people across faith lines, not just within Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
What do I love about Christianity? I think Jesus is really neat.
All right.
What a cool guy.
All right.
I'm Elaine Booker, and I was born into Christianity, and I just love that God's with me all the time. So.
Nice. Thanks.
My name is Mike Rowan. I was born into Christianity, moved from being a Lutheran all the way through high school to met my wife and have become an Episcopalian ever since. I'd say bottom line, I like the thinking and the guidance in a world that's just constantly turmoil and violence and everything else. I find the church a refuge.
Great. Thank you.
David Lucas, born into Christianity, into the Episcopal tradition later in life. And I think it's neat that God is still speaking through the Christian community to the world and to us as individuals.
Great. Thanks, David.
Marianne Kinder, born into Christianity, Methodist until 4 years ago. Following Jesus is just such an amazing path and a challenge. And I looked at other religions, but nothing quite worked for me.
Other religions or other Christian denominations?
No, other religions.
Okay.
Just because you don't know what you don't know.
That, well, sure, and there's nothing wrong with being curious, which we will get into and in a little bit. But thank you for sharing that.
Sylvia Ahmed, cradle Episcopalian, born in England. That's why I refer it that way.
Yeah.
Married to a Muslim for 47 years. Had to leave the church, came back to the church, and have been here ever since.
You had to leave the church?
It was very uncomfortable. I didn't like the comments on Sunday mornings when I got ready to come to church.
Oh.
I
figured I could stay at home and pray without being hassled.
Was that, did I hear you correctly? You say you were married to a Muslim?
Yeah.
Yeah, so was that the source of the comments?
Yeah.
All right, that's, I'm sorry that that was your experience. That's really too bad.
He was very devout,
Uh-huh.
devout Ahmadi, which is a sect that
Yeah.
really, you know, the Ahmadis, okay?
Yeah.
So it was, we ended up with our children not following anything
Hmm,
because he pushed it and I didn't.
got it.
So,
Okay.
just too painful to do.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about that was your experience in the Christian church, and thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Sylvia. Either one, Donna, you want to?
I'm Patty Roth. I grew up as a Catholic in North Carolina. And my dad was, and I went to church together, and then my sister, and then eventually my mother came into the church. And I got married after I got out of college and had 6 children, and we raised them all as Catholics. And then we got a divorce.
Hmm,
And so I looked around. I was trying to be very open and to see, and ended up in the Episcopal Church. And I really appreciated it. I've gotten a lot from it. And, I think I've been pretty active in it.
yeah.
It's been good. But my kids, they're scattered.
Yeah.
So.
Yep, we'll get into that a little bit too. Hi, Donna?
Hi. I grew up Catholic, so I was in the Christian religion. Then I tried the United Church of Christ, and I loved it because it seemed more freeing, that they accepted more people.
Hmm,
Then we moved out here and we went church shopping. One church I went in and the preacher was going, "Thank you for dressing the correct way." And I looked around and all the women were dresses and I thought, oops, this is not my church. And then, so we shopped around and we did go to St. Francis when it was at LaSalle a couple times, but then they switched church hours or mass hours. So we went back to the Catholic church. And one time I followed the priest to the back after services and I said, "Are you telling people how to vote?" And he says, "Well, not this time, but I have in the past."
hmm,
And then my son was gay and he said he didn't want to go to church at Catholic church because he knew that God didn't believe in him.
hmm.
So I thought, I called up and got a hold of Sally Weaver and started crying on the phone.
Yeah,
So we came here.
yeah. And what do you like about Christianity, or most identify with Christianity?
That they teach that God is love.
Hmm.
And I think in seeing other religions that, that aren't Christians, some of them teach that too. I think that's a fundamental thing that a lot of them teach. But since I was born Christian, that's what I believe in.
Yeah. Well, that is most of, and in fact, that is, it is in fact how most people come to their religious identity is through birth. And
Through what? Sorry, through what?
through birth, you're born into it.
Yeah.
It's transmitted to you, transmitted to one as a child from the elders in that religious community, and there's not. So that's how most people come to their religious identity, is through their faith of origin, as it were. And so, when you live in a country such as ours, which is, despite what you may hear, is so welcoming to immigrants, and we have assimilated a lot of people from a lot of different countries and cultures for a long time, but just particularly accelerated in the last 25, 30 years or so. Our religious landscape is changing. So in the early 20th century, even mid 20th century, there was a great variety of expressions of Christianity, but now there's a great variety of religions. And so people are coming to this country, they're bringing their religion of origin with them, and they're establishing worshiping communities here, for lack of a more precise term, and they are beginning to integrate into the culture. And so that has caused a huge shift in the religious landscape of this country. And most notably, it has caused a decline in the number of people who identify as Christian. And so that's a little bit, but that's not necessarily people changing faiths. But there is a variation of that happening as well. But it's just that we are becoming a more religiously diverse culture. And that's just what it is. If we can, where's the barrel there? So, but let's take a look. So the decline of Christianity is, and this is what Pew calls it, is the decline of Christianity. I'm just telling you that the numbers are shifting, and Christianity is not as dominant or as normative as it once was. And so there's some lines on here that you can see, but this is essentially 2019 information, and this is a aggregate study, and you can see in 2019 there, the very top solid line, and well, both of them to Protestant Christianity, which for sake of this conversation, I'm going to include all of mainline denominations. For the first time, we are less than 50% of the U.S. population in people who identify as Christian. And so a number is still, if you combine Catholic and Protestant together, it's still over 50%, but not by much. And so, and this is this is a pretty big change there over the last few years, and it's only accelerating. And if we see here, this is one that shows basically the same thing, except what is parallel happening is that we're just becoming a less religious country as a whole, and not necessarily religious, but it's how one measures religiosity, right? And so demographers try to determine religiosity by three ways. It is behavior, belief, and belonging. And so one of the ways that they try to, and those are in reverse order, but one of them is belonging. Do you belong in a church? And this is what this shows. And that question actually happened to be, are you a member of a church, a synagogue, or a mosque? But, and so you can see that number has dipped below 50% as recently as 2020. So as a whole, we are, as a country, there are fewer and fewer people in, as this question is framed, are members of a religious community. But here's the problem with this, is that not all religions count their belonging the same way that Christianity does. So this is just this is another thing that we're seeing too. It's like, the default in demographers doing this work is that they're overlaying a Christian understanding of religious organization and life onto religions that may not even have that. So you don't become a member of a synagogue the same way that you become a member of a Christian church. You don't engage with a Muslim does not engage with the mosque in the same way that it's not necessarily expected, and we'll get into this in the behavior part of it, but it does not, you're not expected to be at Friday prayers, for instance, if you're not there for months at a time, nobody will edit. And the Muslim's personal experience, it doesn't change one bit how devout they see themselves to Islam. And then the Eastern religions, that this is the all church membership organization, it's just a foreign concept. So, these numbers are a little flawed, just recognizing that. But the big thing is, so if most people are identifying as Christian, you can still see the decline in Christian participation, based on these.
And Jim, with your permission, I'll share these slides for
Sure.
anybody who might be watching after.
So this is, and this is just more that same Gallup poll, and this shows that the younger one is, the less involved that they are. And you might have seen some of that even here at St. Francis. And it's just, it is just the way the millennials are, they're almost up to almost 40% not reclaim no religious identification. And so, and this trend is continuing. And so so we worry about, Christianity losing out to other religions. What we're really losing out to is people who claim no religious identification at all. And I don't want to put it in terms of winning and losing. What is the biggest, our decline is going to people who claim no religious affiliations. We're gonna see that in 1 second. There they are, the nuns, people who have no religious identification. They are now a third of Americans that identify a preference for I self-identify a religious preference, and they are one in three, and they are about a third there. And so this is people who are agnostic, atheist, but more and more they are nothing in particular. The nuns, we have no religious preference. And it's really interesting. Demographers think that by 2042, which, remember when that seems so far off in the future, and it's yikes, it's less than 20 years, they could be up 47% of the population. So that really causes a lot of angst in organized religion circles, right? Religious organization and institutional circles. But that's not our topic here today. I just want you to know, when we're talking, as we get into this, that can at times be a sensitive topic. How do we maintain Christian identity in a multi-faith world? We usually approach this topic out of fear that we're going to take over. It's just like, religion's not immune to wanting to hold on to things like power and privilege and dominance and being normative and, all of those things. And we really don't even know what we're afraid of. And we shouldn't necessarily be afraid of this either, but just to get a baseline of what we're talking about, and what is just important to know that this group is now the third largest group in the country between Roman Catholics and Protestant Christians, and the nuns are statistically tied for the largest religious groups in the country.
Well, what's interesting is there's not Gen Z yet on there, and as the parent to the oldest Gen Zs, what you think is, us Gen Xers who were raised by boomers, well, more boomers had religious affiliation. So that means more of my generation had religious connection and affiliation. My generation goes down, then that means fewer of those behind us, millennials, Gen Z, have exposure to any kind of faith community.
Right.
And that lack of familiarity means we have to, I think in a total, no matter if you're Christian or any,
Well,
think in a whole new way about things don't feel familiar. People don't know. It isn't comforting to them to come in the space or sing the song or hear the prayer.
And just a quick aside, we don't want to spend too much more time on that, but just to know that this next group, or this group that is religiously unaffiliated, about half of those people claim to have been raised in a home that is religiously unaffiliated, which means a faith tradition is not being transmitted to them. And that cuts across all religions. And so, and this is just to show you, again, to highlight this a little bit, that, so look at us, mainline Protestants, we're the most volatile in that, if you want to call this losing people or whatever, but we're the most volatile in the change in our numbers. But across the board there, except for other faith traditions. And so the evangelical Protestant one is a bit of an anomaly, because what's not seen there is that they peaked in like 2009. And so they started kind of where they are, then they peaked, and then they came back down. So there, even though it shows a plus, they are declining, but everybody else, except for other faith traditions, and this is other faith traditions are still only about 6% of the total population in the US. And there shows a gain there. And again, that's what we talked about, the increase in immigration, and also for whatever reason, the Latter-day Saints, which are more colloquially known as the Mormons, are in that group as well. And they have seen rather large growth as well. And then
They're really not growing anymore, though.
Oh, they're not.
Nobody.
I
Well,
was gonna say, don't they object to also not being categorized as Christian?
they do not. They want to be.
They want to be.
They want to be classified.
That's what I'm saying.
They
They
just
don't-
they
Yeah,
would object to being. in
Yes,
other
they
ones.
would.
That's
Yeah.
shows up sometimes.
They would, but the general social survey, just whatever they
Yeah.
decided to lump them in there.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Don't the Mormons go through the death census and pull names out and say, we make you a Mormon?
I
It's a
have no-
genealogy,
I have-
baptism for the dead, yeah.
Yeah,
I
But
have,
that wouldn't count in current membership.
okay.
But see, if within churches, do you count people who have ever crossed your door? Or do you count Everton attendance? Or are you counting?
Yeah, I've
the
heard
most
that I'm
active.
still, that Donna and I and Patty are all still counted as Catholics, because
Yeah.
once you're baptized, you're on the rolls and you never come off. Is,
is that
that's
right?
what I heard.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true,
Well,
but I have no idea.
that's a different topic for a different time.
Mhm.
And so
So
I
many.
do not, I've never heard that, Donna, so I don't, and I don't know enough.
In fact,
To-
the
to
Jewish
answer it.
religion sued them.
Is that right?
And they said, we died for our right to have our religion, in the Holocaust.
They were baptizing Holocaust
Yeah.
victims.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so that's but what it is a fine example of is the reason that we need to be able to work and have relationships with people in other.
Have conversation
faith
across
tradition.
conflict, one might say.
Yeah, right. So show up Wednesday night for that. I wish I was gonna be. Are you gonna YouTube that? But I mean, so as our population becomes more religiously diverse, we are, confronted with the reality of that in where we live, where we work, where we go to school, the hospitals that we are in, the ball games that we go to, all of these places, we are going to be shoulder to shoulder with people from other faith traditions. And how do we work and play and live with other people in a respectful way while still holding a lot of people want to put this into a dichotomy. It's like you're either a strong Christian and we need to evangelize, and it's just or I just demur and I won't say anything about Jesus, or I won't say anything about my church because I'm going to offend someone. And that's no way to be in a relationship with anyone in any way, where you're not being your authentic self. So how do we bring our authentic Christian selves to these relationships with other people from religion? And this isn't a question about tolerance. It's not even a question about acceptance. It's about being secure in who we are and letting other people live freely as they are and still hold true to the gospel and our mission to and how we work in the world. And so I want you to take a look at this quote from Mark's gospel. And Jesus said this, and so you probably, whether you knew it was, how many gospels is this in, is probably the better question, right? But you should love your Lord, the God, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second of this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. So if that is if that's where we're going to start our conversation with, then we've got two ways of interacting, two things to keep in mind when interacting with our religiously diverse neighbors is love God above all and to love your neighbor. If we follow those two things, we can ground everything else we do, in that. So love God above all. So what do we had a couple people do this. So how is God revealed to us, right? So we are born into Christianity, right? It's our religion or faith identification of origin. And so that's how most of us got here. But then our own kind of personal encounter with God, there's one that's not up here, but is revealed in three or in a few ways. And I am interested in other ways, but God is revealed to us through Jesus Christ. That is what I believe. That's pretty standard Christian across thing is this how. And then God is also revealed through Scripture. And one could claim that also God is revealed through service or mission. And we can talk about that a little bit. But are there other ways that that God is revealed to us that come to mind for people?
In our tradition, I think through the Eucharist.
Okay, sacramental, you're right, great. And make sure to update that slide to that. But
You have revelation through community and you have revelation through private experience as well.
Mhm, mhm. So, but these two I want to really bring, because it's like God is revealed through Jesus Christ and our post-Easter experience, and then about 2,000 years of the formation of doctrine and whatever, but not whatever, but through formation of doctrine and tradition and everybody's their own way of coming to this is that, Jesus is this magical being that changed everything. But what we forget about Jesus is that he began as a reformer, right? So we can have conversations about this and you bit a different thing, but in the life and ministry of Jesus, he was a reformer within his own religious tradition. And so he didn't set out necessarily to start his own religion, but he was reforming within and he wanted to make Judaism better. And so, and to do that, he had to enter, how many stories do we have of Jesus with the Samaritan woman at the well, with oh my gosh, what he dined with sinners and outcasts, right? And so, even we see Jesus and then the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees. And so all these sects within Judaism he dealt with. He even dealt with people outside of his own religion, people that were, caused the authorities in the temple to grumble at him. And so we see from that example that, loving God does not mean necessarily shunning everybody else, and there's only one way to do it. A lot of things that Jesus was fighting against were these very narrow, rigid expressions and ideas of how God should be worshipped and how one should interact with those people. And the other is, Jesus God is revealed through Scripture. And we don't have time to do this today because I want to get into your questions and conversation, but I do want to, if we take a real close reading of Paul and the New Testament, we see that there is generosity of spirit from people from other religions that we can be in conversation, that we can share, collaborate with, and and work with and not compromise who we are, and certainly in no way are hindering the gospel from being shared in the world. And St. Peter, who we talked about in the in later in Acts, from where we are this morning, he goes and says that, I see that God is for everybody, and there's a vision where he is like, all these foods, and I've kept people from the temple, and I shouldn't have, and should have welcomed them. Paul is very, there is no slave or Greek, and all that from his letters. So we can still be faithful to these things and love God, and as long as that is our intention, we see that there is room for conversation. The next part of that, Jesus's command to us, is to love your neighbor. And so here are the components for compelling inclusivity, right? Is that to see all people as created in the image of God, right? So we are inclined to love ourselves, but a lot of times we need reminders that we are also called to love others, right? And so no matter what our Christian belief, we believe in the sanctity of all human life. And so we need to have respect and show other people dignity as a child of God. As followers of Christ, as you revealed in the scripture, as following the model of his ministry, as opportunities for service, and maybe even see the sacraments sustain us for this, we're called to be about justice, right? And part of being justice is defending the rights of others. So we, if we want accommodation for prayer space and on a college campus, for example, then the same, we should also want that accommodation for others in of others' faith. Workplace is a big one that we get into at the Interfaith Partnership, and just a lot of it is we don't even think about, but because Christianity is so normative, Christmas holidays, but not accommodating holidays for others, and that if we expect that kind of treatment, then we should also be passionate about defending the rights of others to have that treatment. So just thinking about all those justice ways that to respect and defend the rights of the others. And this is the other one, is like permission to be curious, right? So go to a Latter-day Saint chapel and experience one of their worship services. One of my favorite things to do is all the mosques around town have open house days to go and learn about their how they practice their faith and what's it about. There's nothing wrong with that, and it doesn't. And you can do that. And the big thing we did with the Turkish American Society this spring was to have at-home iftar dinners. So this is the month of Ramadan. We're coming to the end of the month of Ramadan, and so Muslims fast during that day. And if at the end of the day they break their fast with a meal, they had invited people to their homes to share in the iftar dinner. And we sat around the table and shared in that meal, and also had conversations and learned from one another. And we really have to be intentional about doing that, because it has so many benefits, but we're so reluctant to do it because, well, face it, we're busy, but also we've got the life of our own religious organizations to tend to. But the more we get to know one another, the more that we have a better understanding, and there is certainly less fear, but we even see that there's more common ground for doing good in the world, doing good in the world together. And then loving our neighbors with concrete acts of kindness, right? Is there a way to the Hindu family that moves into your neighborhood, from our demographic, they would be welcome. They would like to be welcomed with the casserole patrol as well as anybody else, right? Concrete acts of kindness is just and we are called to love our neighbor. And so, how do we do that concretely, right? This is more than just mental assent to, oh, I'll be nice, I'll be respectful. But once these relationships are built, then we are able to have these deep, rich relationships when we practice kindness with our time, affection, and charitable giving, right? Part of that is, the meal ministry. If we were able to do it, we'd get you together with the Hindu temple and Islamic Foundation and so forth
The
and so
other
on.
thing is, several years ago, through Sylvia and her connections with the mosque, we were able to attend a Ramadan meal. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
I just loved it, going into there and it explained everything.
Sure. And so I want to see this. So one of the things like we get into is, acceptance and, these words that are thrown around. But the goal that we want to get into with interfaith relationships is solidarity. Solidarity is a word that gives us room to maintain our own beliefs and be our authentic selves as in our Christian identity, but still come alongside and be with people of other faiths in the situations that they find themselves in. And I just want to read this to you, and we can read it a couple times, and I hope you can see it all right. So there's a lot of words on a small screen up here. I should have had this as a handout, but as I read this to you, I want you to listen for phrases that pop up and what these phrases mean to you, and what this idea of solidarity versus acceptance is. And so this is in my mind, solidarity is the goal, and solidarity I understand as my understanding of Jesus and his message leads me to see each faith tradition, including my own, as having its own history, value, strengths, weaknesses. I seek to affirm and celebrate all that is good in each faith tradition, and I build intentional relationships of mutual sharing and respectful collaboration with people of all faith traditions, so all our faiths can keep growing and contributing to God's will being done on earth as it is in heaven.
Who said that?
It's not a set, it's from a book that promotes interfaith.
Got it.
And the goal is to get from mere respect or acceptance or tolerance. Those things are kind of static and just are kind of base level, what we should do just as decent human beings to one another, to solidarity, which is more active and all. So this is sort of the goal. But in your own relationship with people from other faiths, or your own feelings about Christian identity or lack of it, what phrases from this resonate with you? What causes questions inside of you? Yeah.
I'm just gonna say, I'm gonna push back some, I've got enough evangelical background in me to know that there are proof texts for the exclusivity of Christianity. And Christianity is not the only church that has, only religion with exclusivity in some of its elements. Certainly there are forms of Islam that are exclusivist.
Mhm.
Others tend not to be. There's, again, you can start to go down the list. But if I believe that Jesus is the one only way to God, and I love my neighbor, then I should be forcing my religion down their throat, basically. And that is an attitude that I've certainly encountered plenty of times. Now I operate in a different way of understanding, but there are people who sincerely, for them, what they believe about Christianity is there's one path to God, and that's Jesus. If you don't have Jesus, you're going to spend all of eternity in that bad place. And there are analogous beliefs outside of Christianity for that sort of thing. So in effect, what you have to say in all of this is that we are accepting a kind of a sort of universalist position here, that God's cool with everybody or with most people.
I don't,
whether that's something you accept.
where does it say that in that? It does not say that anywhere in that.
celebrate all this good, keep growing and contributing to God's will being done on earth as in heaven. So the idea is that Islam contributes to God's will, which is, again, I will say there were people who say, no, that does not, none of it contributes to God's will because it ain't Christianity.
And I would say, but that's, I think that, well, I would wonder if we're not limiting what God's will is, and if our mission as Christians is to feed the poor, heal the sick, deliver all this, all the things that we are listed to do, Matthew 25 and all those things, and people from Islam are doing it. So why can't we be in respectful collaboration and faith, just because it's still contributing to God's will being done?
I'm just trying to recognize that there are other kinds of voices out there, which is the reason we sometimes find ourselves in these very adversarial conditions, is because of sincerely held beliefs that, it's my way or the highway.
Well, I'm not saying, well, yes. So three responses to that. One is that all religious groups have extremes in them, and because we're human at the end of the day, there's no way to avoid that. And just because they are extreme and loud doesn't mean they're right. The second part is, as far as interpreting biblical text. I mean, a lot of people go back to this: how is God revealed to us, and is revealed through Jesus Christ. A lot of people, these more extreme don't take the time to do the study necessary and to do real biblical interpretation, right? And just take that like, oh, Jesus is the way, it says that, but don't do any real work to realize that Jesus was a reformer within his own thing. Those things were written and taken in the context that Jesus was trying to reform the temple at the time, and those kind of proof texting, right, is really about something that this is not. And so all of us need to be, whether in community or on our own, be doing our own work of biblical interpretation and realize that there are times where we need to discern for ourselves and our community, what is love and what is murderous, and choose as a community which to follow. So I'm just saying that those I still don't think that even if one does take those terms to the extreme necessarily, that there's anything wrong with our understanding of God's will, working with others to make sure it's accomplished, because that's the end goal that we're all trying for. And again, this is the goal. This is what we strive for at Interfaith Partnership, right? And this kind of work. And I think that there is a lot of good that can be done with this sort of active work with other faith groups.
I will say, in my experience with Interfaith Partnership, just over the past 5 years, and maybe yours with the PC USA Episcopal conversations, but it isn't always easy. I mean, the first time I went to a cabinet meeting as a seminarian intern and went to shake somebody's hand, and they would not shake my hand because they couldn't touch me because I'm a woman.
Yeah, but this,
I still don't really have words for that.
Sure,
And
again, yes, and very understandable, and I would get that. But again, our question is, how do we live and work in solidarity with people of other faiths without compromising our own?
right, and my
Christian
point
faith?
in sharing that is just that this isn't pie in the sky, namby-pamby, skip. Like, I think, Michael, you're pointing out, some like intellectual challenges that others could pose to it. And I'm remembering some concrete, like interactional challenges to it. It isn't like, oh, yay, you know, Care Bears and rainbows.
Mhm.
And there are often topics that will come up, like when there was the bombing in Orlando of the gay bar. And did this predate you being
Yeah,
there?
I'm not part of
And
this.
we tried as an interfaith cabinet to come together to make a statement on that violence. And that was not easy.
Mhm.
I think that I have been in situations which I said, which is really, really, I said it, in a sense, it may seem strange to us, but yet I said very seriously, I said you can perform acts of kindness, which, and like that, my husband, he is no longer with us, he died almost 3 years ago, but he was Jewish. I said, before we moved to St. Louis, we were involved with an Orthodox Jewish community, which he was brought up with. But, and this was back in Pennsylvania where we lived, and I said it was a small Jewish community and we all, and like that, a lot of times I would go to synagogue with him and there was sometimes a janitor or someone would not show up. And the rabbi's wife would come along and ask me if I could turn the lights on for them, because they were not allowed to do anything like that.
Right.
And I said, I was willingly and glad to do it for them. Also, I would fill her coffee pot for her or something like that. And after services and like that, because she wasn't allowed to do that, fill it up and move it from one place to the other.
Right.
And like that. So this was my act of kindness for her. But another thing is that happened to me when we moved to St. Louis. My husband had to join the conservative temple here over in B'nai Amunah. And so because that's the only place that the rabbi accepted me. I said, but he was new into his community. And it was maybe he was with them a year, and then finally they had a meeting about whether or not they wanted to accept him or not. And so along with the meeting, my husband and I attended, and it came along with different things that he did. And so I told him, I said, well, he is very good, he's very ecumenical, because I said, he accepted me along with my husband. I said, I am not Jewish, which I shocked half of their community, like that. And I said, and he accepted me to come in order to attend services with my husband. And like that, but he does do a lot of ecumenical things, because the second Seder that he holds, I said, he does invite people of other religions to come to their second Seder at the synagogue.
Thank you for sharing those
And
stories.
people
I have
can
to-
call and make reservations.
I have to get Jim all outfitted for worship, and he's not used to our rhythms and routines. He's our preacher today. So that's right. Thank you for sharing the stories. I love knowing your background.
Well, just show one quote that I got or came across in this work is, there's just no denying that our country is becoming more religiously diverse, and if the goal is pluralism, which it is for me, and that does not mean diminishing anybody's religion. It just means that everybody has space to live in harmony and peace with one another. Religion is judged by the benefits it brings for its non-members. And back to our quote from Jesus is, we got to love God, so we got to be devout in our own way, in our practice, and in our own community. But we also got to love our neighbor, and doing that is the best way that, in my mind, that we can live the gospel and live in harmony with our neighbors.
Thank you so much, Jim, for being with us and for preparing this time for us together.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you.